We filed a lawsuit, I think it was in January or something, and so the hearing's on right now, this week, yesterday, today, I think it's one more day, maybe two. And, you know, that seems very slow, but actually in normal litigation, that's pretty speedy. You know, normally you don't get from lawsuit to trial in 5 months, which I think is when we filed it. Anyways, our lawyers in Calgary are, so Sheila is live tweeting it. Back in federal court today for the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and Rebel News challenge of Trudeau's COVID jail program, which incarcerates innocent, healthy people for 72 hours upon return to their own country. It's insane. To support our fight, please go to nocovidjails.com. We're going to go through some of Sheila Gunn-Reid's live tweeting of a major lawsuit that's underway right now in the Federal Court of Canada, in which we are an applicant, or a plaintiff as it might be called in another setting. As you know, or you may not know, anyone who flies into Canada from another country must go to a quarantine hotel. It's mandatory. It's like a jail that way. It costs $1,000 a night. I mean, it depends, but approximately $1,000 a night. Is usually a crappy airport hotel. And it makes no sense because, I mean, for example, when our former reporter, Keean Bexley, did it, he had his car parked at the airport. He could have gone straight from the plane to the car and gone home. How many people would he have come into contact with? 0. Instead, he had to go through some bureaucrat and then go on a shuttle bus and then go to a hotel, go to the lobby, go to his room. Like, he said he came into contact with 14 different people. How does that make any sense? If you got your car, they're going to go straight home and quarantine at home for 2 weeks. How does that make sense? And I learned today that under these goofy rules, if you test positive, you're not allowed to go to the quarantine hotels. You go home. What? So if you're sick, you go home. But if you're healthy, you go to the quarantine hotel. What? A lot of weird things there. I learned that none of these people were given their rights. Were told their rights, including right to a lawyer. Just crazy stuff. Anyways, so we filed a lawsuit, I think it was in January or something, and so the hearing's on right now, this week, yesterday, today, I think it's one more day, maybe two. And, you know, that seems very slow, but actually in normal litigation, that's pretty speedy. You know, normally you don't get from lawsuit to trial in 5 months, which I think is when we filed it. Anyways, our lawyers in Calgary are, so Sheila is live tweeting it. Back in federal court today for the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and Rebel News challenge of Trudeau's COVID jail program, which incarcerates innocent, healthy people for 72 hours upon return to their own country. It's insane. To support our fight, please go to nocovidjails.com. And that's the thing, we're crowdfunding our lawyers, and as Sheila mentions, the Justice Center too. So I'm just going to read some of Sheila's tweets. This is what some guy from the CBC is yelling at his dog, and we can all hear it because he forgot to mute his microphone in the federal court hearing. Smack my head, yeah. Today court is expected to hear from Jeffrey Rath, lawyer for Dominique Colvin, the CEO of a cannabis company from Kelowna, BC, who's also suing the government over the COVID jail system. So just to be clear, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, those are our friends there, John Carpe, etc. They're representing a handful of travelers. We are there in our own behalf and representing Keean, who was put through one of these. And then this fella, Dominique Colvin, who is some marijuana tycoon, I guess he was put through the system and he's mad, so he's suing too. So all these, everyone who was suing was bundled together. The lawsuits were joined, and they're being heard all at once. And I think it's the Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Canada. So they really put the top dog on it. So it's being heard by the boss. Hawks, that's our lawyer, Robert Hawks for Rebel News, and Rath, Jeffrey Rath, note the government is and may not accurately be representing the facts in their materials. Rath is seriously concerned, wants an opportunity to make written submissions to deal with misrepresentation of the evidence by the government. Well, I don't know anything about that, but if that's true, it's pretty serious. Rath says a chart the government presented amounts to new written evidence. Okay, I don't know. Rath is now explaining his case. Rath is adopting the Rebel News and Justice Center case as part of his. That makes sense. No point re-arguing what was already argued. Rath is arguing that the government did not make efforts to create minimally invasive policies to deal with quarantine jails. The government presented no evidence that they considered alternatives and rejected the alternatives based on that consideration. Now that's an important point because the government under our Constitution has to protect your freedoms. They may infringe them, but only what's called minimal impairment. If there's a very pressing and substantial concern, and let's say the pandemic is that, your rights can be violated, but only in the most minimal way possible, in a way that's rationally connected to the outcome. So what Rath is saying is the government didn't even consider other alternatives. Rath describes the quarantine as airport incarceration measures. Yeah, well, that's what they are. That's not even controversial. Challenging the forced detention upon arrival in a COVID jail, as well as the forced 14-day quarantine of people who have not one but two clean COVID tests. Yeah, what's the point in taking the COVID test if you're going to be quarantined anyways? Like, how does that make sense? Rath is rightfully pointing out the asymptomatic actually means healthy. Yeah, if you don't, yeah, is there any asymptomatic transmission of this disease? The Quarantine Act requires the government to adopt the most minimally invasive measures. Quote, scheme under the order in council where people who are healthy and who have a screening test that says you're not sick, and they're being told to go to a room and stay in it until we decide you can go. What is that even? And then, so I'm just quoting, so Sheila's quoting Rath, who's up today. Our lawyers were up yesterday. Rath says, people who are sick or symptomatic at the airport don't have to be tested at the airport and can go home without being tested if they report their symptoms. So I don't get it. I never thought that through. So if you were actually sick, you can go home. But if you're actually healthy, you can't go home. What on actual earth is that? Rath, why is it that sick people at the airport can be sent home, but people with a clear COVID test are sent to their room in some instances without supper? Yeah, that's true. Rath, there's a complete dearth of evidence that these measures were considered by Cabinet in accordance with their responsibilities under quarantine. Oh, do you think for a second Cabinet actually considered this? Come on. Chief Justice Crampton is asking Rath about the time it takes for infected people to manifest symptoms or begin to test positive. Rath, the quarantine measures don't line up with the expert advice the government allowed into evidence. 2 clear COVID tests and a 7-day quarantine would probably do. Rath is now questioning the validity of the PCR test as a tool of incarceration for Canadians. This is very interesting. I've read a lot of controversy with the PCR test. Is it enough to send someone into a 3-day jail? Rath, it's very troubling. So again, if you're wondering, Ezra, what are you doing? I'm reading Sheila Gunn Reid's live tweets from the Federal Court of Canada today, where Rebel News and others are challenging these airport COVID jails. We are literally in court with 2 Top Gun lawyers. This Rath is another lawyer representing another guy who's suing at the same time. Rath, it's very troubling to me that when we ask a witness if they think cycles of amplification for the PCR test lead to false positives, and the witness says no. Rath describes the PCR testing as akin to a magnifying glass on a photocopy. Well, we know that PCR tests have a lot of false positives. PCR tests can't determine between live virus and fragments of virus that people have survived that are no longer capable of infecting anyone. The argument is that this test should not be used to justify the airport incarceration of innocent people. Rath, the airport incarceration program only applies to you if you're not sick. If you are sick, they don't want you in the COVID jail. They send you home immediately or to a designated quarantine facility. They're essentially in solitary confinement and can't go inside. And that's the crazy thing, is that's how they're treating the healthy people. Rath is talking about his cross-examination of the head of biosecurity for the entire country of Canada, Kimby Barton. Though he points out her science degrees are in zoology, Barton could not explain why it was safe to send people to COVID hotels but not home. Rath describes the COVID jail program as silly and illogical. now discussing the sheer volume of people who are just taking the fines to skip the COVID hotels and heading home where it's safe, because almost everybody intuitively knows how stupid this thing is. Rath says the government used cabinet confidentiality to shield themselves from criticism and examination by the court. Yeah, now, if the government wants to say, oh, that's a secret, that's a secret, that's a secret, I suppose that's their right. But then they haven't proved to the court that they're minimally impairing things. Like, if you want to have all your secrets, don't expect a judge to give you the benefit of the doubt when you're infringing liberties. I think there was a couple more tweets there. Rath says there is no evidence of asymptomatic transmission of COVID within Canada. Rath examined the head of the biosecurity program in Canada about evidence of asymptomatic spread of COVID within Canada. She could not tell him of any. Sheila says makes sense since asymptomatic basically means healthy. Rath says the government has incarcerated Canadians for a risk that doesn't exist. Just a reminder, Rath is a lawyer for the cannabis guy. Rath notes that COVID mortality rates are dropping, but the government wants us to continue to be excessively concerned about variants of concern. And then Sheila just reminds us what she's doing. She's live tweeting. All right, thank you for going through that. So, very exciting. Our lawyers, I think the JCCF lawyers were up first. Saya Hassan, who I've met before, a very lovely young lady. And then our lawyers yesterday, Sarah Miller and Robert Hawkes. Sharp as a tack. Today's Jeffrey Rath. Now, I don't know how long he'll be going on, but then the government will push back, and we'll see how they go. I wonder. They got a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers there ready to push back at him if they try any fancy pants moves. I'm excited. I wish I had the time just to watch the whole thing. I got to do a few things. So you can follow Sheila Gunn Reid if you're very interested in this case. I'm excited. I'm excited that we're in there. And if you want to help us crowdfund our lawyers, please do. Go to nocovidjails.com. I won't tell you how big the bills are, but they are not petite.
Oh, hi friends. What you just saw there is a clip from our Rebel News daily live stream show. It's fun, it's fast, and it's completely unscripted, so you never really know what you're going to get. Just go to rebelnews.com/livestream.